print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the August 12th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Thank you for joining us today. The highlights under Business and Finance are: GM, stung in recent years by parts shortages, is setting up a $4.5 billion safety net designed to keep critical components flowing through supply chains. Cloud computing firm CoreWeave reported its fifth consecutive quarter of record revenue and a sales backlog of $104 billion. Major U.S. stock indexes fell for a second straight session, with the S&P 500 and Dow each giving up 0.3% and the NASDAQ shedding 0.6%. Paramount could start moving out of Hollywood as soon as October if it can't make progress towards settling the antitrust suit California and 11 other states brought to block its acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery. A consortium of investors that includes Jeff Bezos is closing in on a deal to buy a minority stake in Liverpool Football Club from Fenway Sports Group, the owner of the Boston Red Sox. Sony Group agreed with TSMC to invest a combined $4.7 billion in a joint venture to make next-generation image sensors for smartphones. Flight tracking platform FlightAware sued Kalshi, alleging the prediction market company is using its data without permission to let users bet on cancellations. Samsung SDI acquired GM's 49.99% stake in Synergy Cells, a $3.5 billion battery joint venture in the U.S., ending that arrangement as demand for EVs marks time. Intel increased the size of its proposed stock offering to raise $20 billion. Mary, M-A-R-I, Group agreed to buy Britain's ATG, owner of some of the best-known theaters on Broadway and in London's West End, from private equity firm Providence. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. Trump was secretly flown out of Turkey last month on a military jet after the U.S. government was told of an Iranian threat against the president and Air Force One. Iran rulers are taking steps to keep their chronically battered economy functioning just enough to resist a drawn-out U.S. military campaign against them. U.S. forces fired on a Panama-flagged ship that attempted to run the American blockade of Iranian ports. U.S. strikes on Yemen last year killed and wounded hundreds of civilians, according to a Pentagon assessment that was sent to Congress. Senator Darlene Graham, sister of the late Lindsey Graham, will face second-place finisher Representative Ralph Norman in a runoff after she failed to capture the majority of votes in South Carolina's special Republican primary. The number of people killed in Colombia's 7.4 magnitude earthquake rose to nearly 200 as rescue crews worked to pull survivors from the rubble. Russia released an American military veteran who spent more than 4 years in prison under abusive conditions and was said to be gravely ill. Russia has been systemically using drones to probe air defenses in Europe, looking for weaknesses to exploit, Germany's top military officer said. New York City Mayor Zoran Mandani backed a bill that would force Amazon, FedEx, and other companies to employ delivery workers instead of using subcontractors. The University of Michigan will drop grades for first semester freshmen next year in an effort to help newcomers acclimate to the demands of college. Taylor Swift and Lyle Lovett will be inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. The picture on today's front page shows a young boy standing in the street in front of a crowd of people, holding a picture of a young man. The headline, Assad death sentence stirs Syria. The caption, remembered. A young man holds a picture of a relative killed in Syria's civil war Tuesday as people in Damascus celebrated a death sentence in absentia for ex-dictator Bashar al-Assad. The article, Syrian court sentences Assad, other former officials to death. Ex-dictator fled to Russia when his regime collapsed in 2024 after civil war, by Jared Malzin. A Damascus court sentenced former Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad and other officials from his fallen regime to death after convicting them of murder, torture, and crimes against humanity, a symbolic step toward a reckoning with the country's long and violent civil war. Assad, who fled to exile in Russia after he was pushed from power in December 2024, was convicted in absentia, along with his brother Maher, who was an important military commander in the former regime. In their efforts to remain in power following a popular uprising in 2011, Assad and his lieutenants fought a 13-year war that included chemical attacks, large-scale shelling of civilian neighborhoods, mass executions, and industrial-scale torture. Other front-page articles follow. Iran battles to outlast U.S. pressure. Tehran moves to become a survival economy as inflation rises, oil exports fall. By Georgi Kanchev, Henna Masavi, and Summer Saeed. Dubai. President Trump is betting the pressure of sanctions and a naval blockade will force Iran to bend. But the country's rulers are taking time-tested steps to keep their chronically battered economy functioning just enough to resist a drawn-out campaign. Tehran is rationing scarce goods, limiting access to foreign currency, slashing investment, and shifting more of the burden onto households while preserving strategic imports in the essential machinery of the state, analysts said. The result will be a deepening economic malaise that leads to rising poverty and dysfunction, but also more room for Iran's leaders to stall talks with the U.S. That leaves Trump's strategy resting on a risky assumption that Iran will crack before Washington does. Mediators have warned their U.S. counterparts that Iran has been living under sanctions for years, and betting that Tehran will compromise because of economic pressure won't likely yield results. Instead, Iran will likely continue to escalate attacks to raise the price for Washington and its allies. If Iran can outlast Washington's expectations, it has less reason to give up leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, prolonging the standoff and the risk of renewed fighting. The longer that standoff lasts, the more pressure shifts back onto Trump as energy and shipping disruptions weigh on the global economy and inflation heading into the midterm elections. Anthropic looks to soothe investors ahead of its IPO, by Berber Jin, Corey Drybush, and Kate Clark. Anthropic is meeting with potential investors to shore up confidence in what could be the largest IPO of all time, offering assurances about its rapid pace of growth and strategies it expects will help address a growing public backlash against AI. The $965 billion artificial intelligence juggernaut is staring down a host of fresh challenges that are leading investors to take a more critical look at the company's business, including the recent popularity of cheaper AI systems made in China, tensions with the Trump administration, and a growing backlash to data center construction across the U.S. In recent weeks, investors have pressed Anthropic executives on such topics in pre-IPO meetings, asking them what effect they might have on the company's growth. People familiar with the discussion said. The conversations reflect the tremendous uncertainty that still exists about who will win the AI race and the financial stability of the businesses that underpin it. Anthropic has recently emerged as the front runner in that race, powered by the success of its hit coding tool, Claude Code. But there is also a backlash against the company in Silicon Valley, where many chief executives have grown nervous about its power over the AI ecosystem. The price Anthropic sets and the company's performance after the initial public offering will set the stage for how investors value top AI developers. Trillions of dollars in AI spending, most of which is going towards securing computing resources, largely rest on the assumption that demand for the technology will continue to rise precipitously. Company executives have played down the impact of Chinese competition in meetings, telling investors that Anthropic is hyper-focused on offering cutting-edge AI models, the people said. Chief Executive Dario Amodei and other top U.S. AI leaders have publicly said that most users want the most intelligent AI systems available at any given time, suggesting that Chinese systems are less of a threat since their capabilities generally trail those of top AI models by at least a few months. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump secretly flew from Turkey by Josh Dawsey and Marianne Levine. Washington. President Trump was secretly flown out of Turkey last month on a military jet after the U.S. government was told of an Iranian threat against the president and Air Force One, according to a U.S. official and another person briefed on the matter. Trump boarded Air Force One following a meeting with world leaders in Ankara, but was then transported to a military jet in an airport catering truck, the official and the person said. The U.S. official said Israel briefed the Trump administration on the intelligence, which included a threat to use shoulder-to-air missiles to target Air Force One. Some of the president's top aides stayed on Air Force One, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the official said. No missiles were fired at any of the planes, the U.S. officials said, adding that it was the first time in Trump's presidency that such a decoy effort had been used. Mortgage leader ended up needing a rescue by Ben Glickman. Matt Ishbia made a fortune by running the largest mortgage lender in the country. He used his wealth to buy the NBA's Phoenix Suns for $4 billion in cash and to build a mansion in Michigan with a trampoline park and rock climbing wall. The businessman surprised investors last week when he revealed that an ill-timed wager left his company, United Wholesale Mortgage, with a $600 million hole. The Potomac, Michigan company said it was suspending its common stock payouts and getting financing from Oaktree Capital Management, a lender to distressed companies. Shares tanked 35%, leaving them down about 70% this year. Ishbia, 46 years old, defended the deal, saying it was a strategic partnership that gave his company access to Oaktree's expertise in the mortgage sector. He said that the infusion eliminates uncertainty about UWM's funding needs, and that if it was just about capital, he could put money in himself or get random people. Oaktree is getting a great deal, and I'm happy for them, Ishbia told investors on Thursday. When they make a boatload of money and are very successful, so will most of our shareholders. To do the deal, Ishbia gave up some control over his company. In exchange for its $1.5 billion infusion, Oaktree gets the right to veto changes to the company's C-suite and corporate bylaws and to force UWM to buy out its stake after 7 years. It gets 2 seats on the board, warrants for additional shares, and at least $600 million in guaranteed return. DMV is ground zero for election integrity fight. States under pressure to keep non-citizens off voting rolls fear that even small errors will undermine the midterm elections. By Louise Rafnowski, Eliza Collins, Joseph Diavilla, and Corinne Rami. In President Trump's primetime address last month declaring U.S. elections vulnerable, his centerpiece claim was that more than 250,000 non-citizens were registered to vote. A day later, the Department of Homeland Security said the striking number covered just 4 states. New Jersey Governor Mikey Sherrill already knew her state had a problem, but nothing of that scale. The day before Trump's speech, the Democrat learned from her state attorney general's office that under the previous governor, the state had accidentally put thousands of non-citizens on its voter rolls. Even worse, hundreds of them appeared to have cast ballots. The governor and her advisors quickly realized they needed to acknowledge the errors. On July 21st, Sherrill said 6,600 non-citizens had been added to New Jersey's voting rolls from June 2023 to June 2024, blaming a software glitch at the Motor Vehicle Commission, which automatically registers eligible people to vote. While applying for a driver's license, these people selected no when asked if they were U.S. citizens, Sherrill said, but the system registered them anyway. The number of those who voted was relatively small, fewer than 400, according to Sherrill. In a state with about 6.7 million registered voters. But the revelation stoked an already smoldering national debate initiated by the White House over the security and integrity of U.S. elections. There's a graph showing that home sales fell in July, and that says sales of existing homes declined 1.7% in July after a rise in mortgage rates. Wine, cheese, and 26.2 miles? What could go wrong? A marathon in France's Bordeaux region includes wine stops. Dietitians don't approve. By Elise Goncalves. Michael Steele prepared for the Boston Marathon by toggling between short and long runs. His training regimen for the Marathon du Médoc next month adds stopping at different pubs to down a glass of wine. The course through France's Bordeaux region requires runners to prepare their bodies not only for the harsh physical toll of a 26.2-mile road race, but also for the 20 wine stops along the route. It's not a combo that nutritionists endorse, but that's part of the thrill. You also need to ensure that you're going to get to the end in one piece, said Steele, 43, from Southampton, England. Leaving the front page, U.S. fires on ship evading port blockade. Military helicopter targets vessel flying Panama flag amid tighter enforcement, by Jared Malzahn. U.S. forces fired on a Panama flag ship that attempted to run the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports early Tuesday, the U.S. military said, stepping up enforcement as the Trump administration attempts to squeeze the regime economically. A U.S. Navy MH-60 helicopter fired 2 Hellfire missiles into the engine room of the MV Villa Nova after its crew ignored warnings from American personnel working to enforce the blockade of Iran's ports, the military said. The cargo ship was trying to cross the Gulf of Oman for an unspecified Iranian port, the military said. The ship is no longer transiting to Iran in violation of the U.S. blockade, which remains in full effect, said an ex-public post by U.S. Central Command, which oversees operations in the Middle East. There were no reports of any casualties in the pre-dawn incident, which maritime security firm Vanguard said took place about 70 nautical miles from the coast of Pakistan. A U.S. official said the ship appeared to be attempting to transfer its crew to another civilian vessel after the attack. The missile struck the vessel, causing a fire that was subsequently extinguished, Vanguard said in an initial report on the incident. All 17 crew were accounted for, it added. In June, 3 Indian sailors were killed in a U.S. operation to enforce its blockade of Iran, an Indian official said at the time. Those were the first reported deaths resulting from the U.S. effort to starve its foe of oil revenue and force it to make a deal to end the war. Rescuers race to find earthquake survivors. Colombia death toll nears 200 as wide damage tests the new government. By Juan Ferrero, Jenny Carlina Gonzalez, and Ryan Dubé. Bogota, Colombia. The number of people killed in Colombia's 7.4 magnitude earthquake rose to nearly 200 as rescue crews worked feverishly across several cities and towns in the country's west to locate and dig survivors out of the rubble. Amid so much pain, I want to express my solidarity with the victims and their families in their suffering, President Abelardo de la Espriella said in a hard-hit city of Pereira. A tragedy like this plunges all of Colombia into mourning. The government has provided fuel for power plants, moved homeless people to shelters, and deployed soldiers to the regions hit by the quake to maintain security and help with rescue operations. German general says Russia is probing NATO's defenses, by Gordon Fairclough. Russia has been systematically using drones to probe air defenses in Europe, looking for weaknesses to exploit, Germany's top military officer said, amid what he called an intensifying gray zone campaign aimed at destabilizing the continent's governments and institutions. Hybrid attacks are taking place every day in NATO countries, especially those on the alliance's eastern flank, General Karsten Brewer said in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. Russia is testing us and looking at how we respond so it can refine its tactics for a future conflict. From World Watch, Russia. American veteran freed from prison. Russia has released an American military veteran who spent more than 4 years in prison under abusive conditions and was said to be gravely ill and at risk of dying, a group advocating for him said on Tuesday. Robert Gilman was on his way to a U.S. military hospital in Texas where he will be medically and psychologically assessed and treated, said Eric Lebson, Chief Strategy Officer of Global Reach, a group that has been working to free him and other American detainees abroad. Gilman, a 32-year-old teacher detained since 2022, was initially handed a 3.5-year sentence in 2022 when he was convicted of beating a police officer after being taken off a train for causing a disturbance. His sentence was extended last year to 10 years after he was found guilty of assaulting prison guards. Before he was flown out of Russia, he had been in a dissociative stupor for 47 days because of the abuse he has suffered in prison, Lebson said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Iran's Trump strategy, dead or alive. He was smuggled in a catering container. So serious is the threat. President Trump likely knows something about catering, but we doubt he ever thought he'd be smuggled off an airplane in a catering container to avoid an Iranian threat on his life. Yet that's what happened in July, officials now say. Mr. Trump flew out of Turkey secretly on a military jet and then was returned to the original Air Force One after landing. The reporters aboard never knew he was gone. The press corps, which had been left on the decoy presidential plane, understandably is up in arms. But the real story is the seriousness of Iran's efforts to kill the president. These attempts are long-standing and help explain why the U.S. is fighting. The regime doesn't hide its intentions. It puts up billboards and murals around Tehran of Mr. Trump lying in a coffin or drowning in a sea of blood. The regime's clerics brand Mr. Trump with labels that demand violence under Shiite Islamic jurisprudence. One who wars against God, one whose blood must be spilled, corrupter of the earth and warring infidel. At times, Iran's regime has put a bounty on his head. 2 grand ayatollahs issued a fatwa against Mr. Trump, reminiscent of the one against Salman Rushdie, which has followed the writer since the 1980s. He was stabbed nearly to death as a result in 2022. If the regime survives past 2028, it will follow Mr. Trump as well. Thankfully, so will the Secret Service. As the late Ayatollah Ali Khamenei once put it, death to America means death to Trump. Only when Iran's regime was speaking to useful idiot Tucker Carlson in 2025 did President Mossad Pezeshkian hilariously claim, without challenge, that death to America really means death to killing. Example, peace. That would be news to federal law enforcement, which has broken up several murder-for-hire plots by the Iran's Revolutionary Guard to target Mr. Trump. In March, a federal jury convicted a Pakistani national on such charges. He admitted being sent by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, for the purpose. Iranian threats hounded Mr. Trump on the campaign trail in 2024. The regime knew that the man who ordered the strike on IRGC General Qasem Soleimani and who led the maximum pressure sanctions campaign was enemy number one. It also knew that his successors, like his predecessors, were far less likely to take action against its nuclear program. For all the talk of how this war has helped Iran's regime, it's no accident that its state media and approved experts stress the need to use the Strait of Hormuz to hurt Mr. Trump in the November elections. The regime is desperate to run out the clock on the Trump presidency, or speed up that clock with deadly violence. Trump jabs at vaccines for children. The U.S. is enduring its worst measles outbreak in years, but that isn't stopping President Trump from spreading vaccine skepticism. He overruled his advisors, press reports say, by issuing Monday's executive order urging Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. to limit proven childhood immunizations. The president's declaration of gold standard childhood vaccine recommendations largely follows a much disputed HHS report in January that advised fewer vaccines on the childhood schedule. Mr. Trump likes to paint a golden sheen on everything, but his proposed regime isn't based on rigorous science or really any science at all. His plan for all children includes 11 immunizations, down from a recommended 17. Vaccines for measles, mumps, rubella, MMR, tetanus, pertussis, and polio would still be universal. But those for hepatitis A and B, dengue, flu, COVID, and rotavirus would be advised only for high-risk children, or else would be left to shared clinical decision-making between doctors and parents. The order also proposes splitting the MMR into 3 separate single disease shots to be administered at separate medical visits. Mr. Trump claimed, without evidence, Monday, that the MMR vaccine in its current form could be quite lethal. Is he trying to scare parents into not inoculating children? Breaking up the MMR shot would require changes in production that could take years. It would also likely reduce immunizations by requiring more trips to the doctor's office. Thanks, Dr. Trump. Echoing HHS's January report, Mr. Trump claims American children receive more vaccines than those in many European countries. That's true, but the U.S. also has a more diverse population. Hepatitis B, which often spreads via contaminated drug needles and can be transmitted from mothers to newborns, is much less common in Western and Northern Europe than in the U.S. Many European countries with socialized health systems also don't want to pay for childhood vaccines for relatively rare diseases, example, meningitis, even if they can prove lethal, or even for more prevalent viruses like RSV and flu that can require emergency care. Regardless, when has Mr. Trump sought to emulate Europe? The president's executive order doesn't compel states or schools to follow his paired regime, but he threatens legal action against those that don't adopt it. He directs Attorney General Todd Blanche to challenge state laws that conflict with parental authority, religious freedom, disability accommodations, and equal protection under the law. Under Mr. Trump's order, the Justice Department could sue states for infringing on parental authority if they require vaccines for school attendance that differ from his recommendations. State police powers to protect public health can sometimes be in tension with parental rights, and some states overstepped during the pandemic, though none mandated COVID shots for school-aged children. In most states, it isn't difficult to get an exemption from school mandates, and in places it's arguably too easy. All states provide medical exemptions from mandates. 29 offer exemptions for religious objections, and another 16 for either religious or personal reasons, according to the National Conference of State Legislatures. Mr. Trump's order could inflame what has regrettably become a culture war over immunizations that was ignited by the Biden administration's overreaching COVID vaccine mandates and attempts to silence skeptics. He's also making the same blunder as Biden officials in trying to coerce states into toeing his administration's line on vaccines. Mr. Kennedy and his plaintiff lawyer friends benefit from spreading vaccine skepticism, but Mr. Trump's jab at children's vaccines could alienate voters who are already souring on his second term. The other risk? More measles. Europe's geoengineering future. The energy needed to cool your house is energy that causes global warming. Therefore, cool the planet, not your house, say European activists and politicians during a time of deadly heat waves, wildfires, etc. A few problems crop up. There's no plan to cool the planet, so Europe's activists are telling Europe's seniors to keep dying at a rate of 47,000 to 60,000 a year amid warmer summers. U.S. residential and commercial space heating consumes twice as much energy as cooling. Globally, the ratio is closer to 4-1. It doesn't follow that in a warming world, more air conditioning means more emissions overall. Not to mention, air conditioning is usually powered by electricity, an energy source undergoing palpable decarbonization. Heating, which a warming world will need less of, is still dominated by combustion fuels. Then there's the conundrum. Consumers trade off more highly valued energy uses against less valued ones. How does it make sense to discourage air conditioning in order to favor the energy Europeans use to drive to Quick E-Mart for a Slim Jim? Unfortunately, as J.P. Morgan energy guru Michael Sembalist recently put it, we're in divinity school, where rationality is roughly equated with atheism when the subject is climate and energy. I spent the first 3 paragraphs of a recent column distinguishing between acknowledging failed climate policy and questioning climate science. You might drop this paper with an ick if you knew how many readers proved my point by shrieking "denier" at me. Many Americans and Europeans have in common that they are passionate about climate change without being passionate to know anything about it. They put less effort into evaluating policy proposals than they do picking out a toaster at Best Buy. Democratic theory tells us how to expect politicians to behave in the presence of such incentives. The bill is now many trillions of dollars for policies that have no effect on the amount of carbon dioxide going into the atmosphere. A few years ago, a top Biden and Obama climate official sighed when I pointed out the wrong turn in climate policy. He added, "I have to believe that putting a price on carbon, at some point will return to the world's agenda. His sigh is a standing indictment of the press, especially the New York Times, for failing to criticize the turn toward climate pork that, as studies of every partisan and nonpartisan stripe have pointed out for decades, don't disincentivize emissions. In the service of public understanding, something else also can't be repeated often enough. 2/3 of the warming in climate models comes not as a primary effect of increased carbon dioxide. It comes from poorly cataloged and measured positive feedbacks. This is why climate models vary significantly in how much warming they forecast. If reading this makes you want to shout denier, this column is for you. If you think no price is too high for reduced emissions, stop exhaling. Each time you emit approximately 95 milligrams. If you think acknowledging the uncertainties of climate science and the wrong turns of climate policy is denialism, this could be an additional reason to stop exhaling. Europe's air conditioning and wildfire puzzle may be a breakthrough moment. There's no guarantee that present trends will continue, but if they do, the European Union could be the first top-tier world player with an incentive actually to alter global temperatures. It could do this by injecting particulates into the atmosphere to produce a 1% reduction in sunlight reaching the Earth's surface. No, this project, which comes with an estimated price tag of $5 billion to $20 billion a year, wouldn't quench specific heat waves or fires. Europe's wildfire problem, in particular, calls for changes in land use policy, also true in the U.S. But geoengineering by sulfates by now has been widely modeled. It's considered in the climate community to be the likeliest proposal for offsetting about 1 degree Celsius of planetary warming that computer models attribute to accumulated emissions. Get ready for this to bust through even the clotted mindset of the times, last seen falsifying why climate scientists have repented of their worst-case emission scenarios. It wasn't because of the success of green energy, as the paper was obliged to admit in a non-retraction retraction. Expected also to bust through the clotted mindset of Europe's policymakers. The ugly truth is, like policymakers everywhere, they've been waving their hands in imposing cost without getting called out for producing zero real-world effect. Now their voters will be demanding a real-world effect they can see and feel if Europe's heat wave and wildfire trends continue. Only experience will tell us how much temperatures actually change in the coming decades. The data probably will never tell us reliably how much fossil fuels were responsible. It won't matter if mankind develops a taste for adjusting climate, because it can. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump versus Socialism. Which do voters revile more? By Jason L. Riley. When political candidates can't run on their record, they often resort to demonizing their opponent. With midterm elections less than 3 months out, this is the central dilemma facing Republicans. Democrats want to make the November contest a referendum on the Trump presidency, while the GOP wants to make it a choice between the two parties' competing agendas. President Trump traveled to Nevada last week to highlight his second-term accomplishments, which include better border security and tax relief for working-class Americans. With the help of our Republican majorities in Congress last year, I signed a big, beautiful bill, Mr. Trump said. So if you're a waiter, a waitress, a bartender, a bellhop, a caddy, I love caddies, a valet, a hotel worker, taxi driver in Las Vegas, or anywhere else, anywhere, you pay zero taxes on your tipped income. The president complained that the press doesn't give him his due. I'm not getting credit from the fake news for what I've done. I never have gotten credit. And he has a point. But Mr. Trump's bigger problem is that a large majority of voters believe his stewardship of the economy has been subpar. The president blames Joe Biden. We inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country. You've got to remember that. Yet voters hold Mr. Trump responsible for current conditions. Inflation is down, but consumer prices are higher than they were a year ago or when Mr. Trump began his second term. Unemployment remains low, but job growth has slowed, and labor force participation has dipped to its lowest level in 5 years. For the first time since 2010, Fox News polls find voters citing Democrats as better on the economy than Republicans, the Journal reported this week. Democrats led by 4 points on the question in April and by 9 points in July, whereas the GOP was viewed as the better economic manager by as much as 15 points in 2022 and 2023. During Mr. Trump's first term, his net approval rating on the economy was consistently positive. During his second term, it has been consistently negative. The president can fault unfair media coverage, but the press was no less hostile during the first term. The administration also errs, as Mr. Biden did, in telling voters that their economic situation is better than they realize. The 46th President Biden insisted to the end that America has the best economy in the world, even as inflation-weary voters in his own parties said otherwise. Mr. Trump told his Nevada audience that Republicans have done a great job in reducing prices, but inflation remains well above the Federal Reserve target of 2%, and the Iran war has increased energy costs, which redound contribute to transportation, manufacturing, housing, and other industries. A Fox News poll last month put the president's approval rating on the economy at 40%. Worse for the GOP, it showed that Democrats are more motivated to turn out in November and perceived as better suited than Republicans to handle income inequality, inflation, and health care. One of the reasons we're hearing so much about the rise of socialism in the Democratic Party is because the president's low job approval numbers make it difficult for Republicans to run on his record. Mr. Trump isn't on the ballot, but he will be on the minds of voters in the swing states and congressional districts that will determine which party controls the Senate and House for the final 2 years of his presidency. Rather than fight voter sentiment about the president, many Republican candidates are happy to focus on the fringe views of their opponents and their party. For Democrats, the goal is to keep the focus on the president's unpopularity, but the party's nomination of self-styled socialist could make that difficult. In Michigan's Democratic Senate primary last week, the narrow victor was Abdul El-Sayed, a progressive from Central Casting. Mr. El-Sayed had called for single-payer health care, free college tuition, and abolishing immigration and customs enforcement. He doesn't believe Israel should exist. Mr. Trump and his fellow Republicans may be unpopular, but is this what voters want instead? The nomination of candidates such as Mr. El-Sayed has smarter Democrats worried. He performed well among highly educated white voters, but bombed with those who are working class or black. Michigan is a battleground state with a lot of blue-collar and minority voters, and they could easily cost Democrats the general election by voting Republican or staying home. Republicans want to avoid an election that is all about Donald Trump. Candidates like Mr. El-Sayed make that easier. Letters to the editor, topic: Reality comes for socialism. Regarding socialism is here and it's serious, Peggy Noonan reminds me of a quote: "The man who is not a socialist at 20 has no heart, but if he is still a socialist at 40, he has no head." Being bright, well-educated, and well-spoken like Zoran Mandani or Abdul El-Sayed is no substitute for lived experience. From Haley S. False, Santa Fe, New Mexico. The Pepper and Salt cartoon shows a man lying down on a couch in what appears to be a psychiatrist's office, and across from them, seated in 2 chairs, is a woman and a man. And that caption says, "In the spirit of fairness, I've invited your parents for a rebuttal." You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 12th issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day or evening.